everyone, and welcome to my final WCW Monday Nitro retrospective, where I am now completing my journey from watching WCW Nitro from the very beginning in 1995 to the Finger Poke of Doom, which I decided would be the cutoff point, because when you get into Nitro in 99 and 2000 and 2001 when it was on death's door, I'm like, I don't really want to watch those. And I'll explain why a little bit later in the video, but I also think the Finger Poke of Doom, while I don't necessarily credit it with being the death of WCW like a lot of other people do, I think there are many other factors in play. The Finger Poke of Doom, creatively and business-wise, didn't help, and that particular night being up against the Mankind and Rock title change on Monday Night Raw was really like the turning point into Monday Night War and something that WCW never recovered from. But I think there were many other factors in play that spelled the end for the company as a whole. But when you think of like Monday Nitro and kind of like the rise, the success, and the ultimate fall, I think the period from 1995 to the Finger Poke of Doom kind of captures that perfectly and captures all the best elements of WCW, which is why I wanted to revisit it, and also kind of showed all the dents of the armor that ultimately led to their demise a couple years after the fact. So the Finger Poke of Doom, that episode was the end for my retrospective, and now we will be concluding it here. And as the title of the video says, and like the finale to Star Trek The Next Generation said, all good things must come to an end. And so we left off with the first half of 1998, and in that period, like I said, there were major dents in the armor that were starting to show post-Starrcade 97. And a lot of those carry over into this batch of episodes in this time period, and in some cases they get worse. And ultimately, if this warning signs were starting to show themselves in the first half of 98, it became very, very apparent by the end of the year, and it was like WCW was kind of, I don't want to say struggling, that's not the word. They were fighting to stay on top or to stay at their peak, and it was clear that signs were coming that they weren't at their peak anymore. And ultimately you would get to that fateful episode, the first episode of 1999, that kind of started the huge downward trend that we would see in the final years of the company. But in the second half of 1998, they were largely carried by a lot of things that they were doing well and some big stars that they had. And it was kind of working to balance out some of the major missteps that they were making. So there was some stuff that they did that I really, really enjoyed, and other stuff that they did that was like, yeah, this is absolutely horrible. So let's start off with kind of like the outside influences, the things that involved outside personalities getting involved in the show, and things that were WCW trying to stay like cool and relevant and hip with the youth, I guess we'll say. First up, I want to talk about Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman, who were starting to appear in the end of the period that I covered last time. And Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman, to me, one of the greatest celebrity involvements in the history of pro wrestling, because you have two players who were on opposing teams in the NBA championship at a time when the NBA was red flippin' hot. And watching The Last Dance, I look back on that era of the NBA now. I'm like, man, we took for granted how good it was. And again, even back then, I was more of a college basketball guy, but at that point, I really did take for granted just how cool the NBA was back then and just the wealth of talent that they had. And for WCW to score this coup and get two players who were on opposing teams in the championship just right before the Bash of the Beach 98 pay-per-view for that tag team main event. I mean, that was just amazing, and to see something like that unfold. Of course, there's the whole controversy with Dennis Rodman skipping practice to go be a part of WCW Nitro and various other things going on, but it was really remarkable. It was really exciting to see. It was akin to when WWF just a few months before this, when they brought in Mike Tyson. It was that type of feel. These larger-than-life personalities that were getting involved in pro wrestling. And where they had kind of a one-up on Tyson, Tyson was kind of an X-factor that was put into the main event at WrestleMania. These guys were actually going to be working and wrestling in a main event that included Hulk Hogan. So That really felt like a big deal, and the end result was one of the biggest buy rates in WCW history, and one of the more exciting celebrity involvements that I've ever seen in pro wrestling. It's one of those things that I point to, and this happened in '97, but when you look at that one Chicago episode of Nitro from '97, and you see the NWO coming out with limos and cigars, and Voodoo Child is playing. You got Michael Buffer, the voice of boxing, doing the announcements. You got Hollywood Hogan, the world heavyweight champion of WCW and NWO. The whole NWO is coming out with him, and he's with Dennis Rodman, the bad boy of basketball. And all of this is happening in Chicago the day that the Bulls celebrated their last NBA championship victory, their previous one. And it was like, you look at something like that and it's like, man, wrestling will never be this cool ever again. Like, it'll never be this cool ever again. When you see stuff like that, it was just truly remarkable. So I think that the involvement of Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman added a ton while they were there, especially leading into that Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. And I think the financial results speak for themselves when you look at the buy rate for that event. So they were great. Less great was Jay Leno. Now, I don't necessarily have anything against Jay Leno. I'll be perfectly honest. The late night TV show, late night talk show format is not one that I've been too big a fan of. Like, I like Johnny Carson. I've watched a lot of old Carson. I really like him. Never cared for Jay Leno. Never cared for David Letterman. I really don't like the crop that's out there right now. I think most of them are terrible because they all come off like, oh God, how do I want to phrase this? They come off like factory assembled robots or like automatons that are just saying stuff to seem nice and pleasant or whatever. And none of it feels legitimate. And the whole thing just feels like kind of a put-on act. But I liked old Carson. I can say that. I liked other hosts I liked. I liked Craig Ferguson. And I liked Space Ghost. But that's about it. So Jay Leno's involvement, even though this is like the peak of Jay Leno's fame, it didn't really excite me all that much. And the stuff that they did with Leno and Bischoff kind of making fun of, the set and everything and doing his whole thing on it. Aside from the NWO going on to Jay Leno's show and taking it over, which that was awesome to see wrestling invade another big show. Aside from that, Jay Leno's involvement never really did it for me. And just kind of, that was one that didn't work. And it's not because Jay Leno didn't try. It's not because Leno himself was awful in it or anything. It was just kind of like, Malone and Rodman, that felt cool. This just kind of feels like a dog and pony show, and it's just kind of an excuse for cheap laughs. So that didn't really do it for me as much as Malone and Rodman did. But it still, it had its moments. And then we got, later in the year, Rick Steiner had a run-in with Chucky. A horror icon, if there ever was one. And now, my feelings on Chucky, the killer doll, the Child's Play movies, it's the only series of films that exists where I have sworn I will watch every single film in the series. I don't need it to be good. I don't need the movie to be well made. I just want Chucky. And that's it. Just give me Chucky and Brad Dourif voicing him, doing wisecracks, and I'll be happy. And even the remake with Mark Hamill, I didn't hate. Was actually much better than I expected. But I like Chucky a lot. However, incorporating a puppet into pro wrestling and feuding with Rick Steiner, it did not cross over well at all. And it just looked stupid. It kind of reminded me of like when WCW used RoboCop. It kind of gave me those type of... And Chucky, Chucky's a funny personality and everything, but at the end of the day, it's still like a puppet. And I don't know what they were thinking. I guess they were promoting the movie. I think Bride of Chucky was out at the time, and that's what they were doing. It was a cross-promotional thing, but it just, as it played out on TV, it did not work well at all. It was just kind of bad. It was kind of bad. And I'm sorry to say that, because I love Chucky, but mixing like a live event type of show with a character like Chucky, it's also confusing because, like, wait, are they saying that Chucky's real? Like, what? How exactly does this work? I don't know. It's that was something that didn't really work for me. So celebrity involvement started off great with Malone and Rodman, and then fell like a rock with Jay Leno, and then the ultimate inclusion of Chucky, which is stuff that I feel like Chucky's involvement kind of gets forgotten. I don't hear that get brought up a lot, but it was It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. Poor Rick Steiner having to sell that he's feuding with a talking doll. That's not one of his proudest moments for sure, but he did his best. He did his best to sell it. I'll give him that. And then, not really a celebrity involvement thing, but we also, towards the end of the year, Hulk Hogan took time off from WCW to run for president and focus on his campaign for president or whatever. And it was an excuse to keep Hogan off TV for a while and then, have him come back and ultimately win the title with the finger poke of doom and all that jazz. But it was, if it was an attempt to get like any kind of outside attention or headlines or anything like that, I don't know if it worked. I don't know if anybody really took Hulk Hogan's campaign that seriously. Maybe some people did. I don't know. But to me, it just felt like it was like when Bob Backlund said he was going to run for president. It was just, it's a wrestling gimmick, whatever. And that's just kind of how I took it. And I don't think it garnered any kind of legitimate kind of attention. Although it's like, could you imagine Hulk Hogan running for president? It doesn't seem as silly now when we've had Donald Trump as president for 4 years. So, and we had Kanye West run for president this year. So Hulk Hogan running for president somehow seems less silly 22 years later. So there was that. So the celebrity involvement side of things, like I said, started off great. And then any attempts to kind of stay relevant in the mainstream, those attempts like Jay Leno and things like that didn't work that well, or not as well as it had in previous attempts at doing so. And then, of course, a lot of the negatives really started to rear their ugly head with the latter half of 1998. The biggest misstep of WCW during this period had to be the handling of Bret Hart, who, as I said last time, the heel turn that Bret Hart did was one of the most damaging decisions that WCW ever made creatively, is that it severely impacted how they could use Bret Hart and really undercut how he should have been used, which is the most sympathetic person on the planet after he'd been screwed by the previous employers, and should have led him down the road to eventually having a match with Hulk Hogan or Hollywood Hogan. And it didn't happen. Instead, they did this thing where he's with the NWO, but he's not really a member of the NWO. And then he just started randomly targeting WCW babyfaces like Booker and Benoit and DDP and Sting and various other things. They did the match with Hogan on that one episode of Nitro, and it was all a ruse just so he could attack Sting and set up a feud with Sting. And a Bret Hart Sting feud isn't a bad idea, but the way they went about it was just baffling, to say the least. And Bret Hart's direction in WCW during this period was just a huge sign of like, because you look at WWF during this period, they were creatively like just hitting it out of the park almost every week. Some of the Crash TV stuff was stupid, but the main like storylines they were doing were really, really strong and very exciting. And you've got the other show, and they can't even get Bret Hart right, which just seems like just baffling to me and everybody else watching. So that's an unfortunate thing about WCW during this period. And of course, probably the most infamous flop during this period has to be the run of the Ultimate Warrior and his feud with Hollywood Hogan, the One Warrior Nation stuff. And it all began with Warrior's debut on that one episode of Nitro, which I almost feel like I can't do it justice. Listen to Eric Bischoff's podcast where he talks about it, and it tells you everything you need to know about that segment, where it actually starts off kind of cool. Where Warrior comes out, it's a big surprise, and it's actually him, it's not the Renegade or anything like that, it's actually Warrior. And the crowd pops for it. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then it keeps going. And it keeps going. And it keeps going. And it keeps going. Before you know it, half an hour has gone by. It's like, uh-oh. It's like, uh-oh. And you look at how WCW had handled previous WWF stars coming over to WCW. Hogan obviously did very well, especially after the heel turn. And even initially, like you could say like the Hulkamania stuff had kind of run its course and it kind of felt like old hat. But having Hulk Hogan there in 94 made WCW feel bigger than it had before. So Hogan had an immediate impact. Savage had an immediate impact. Piper had an immediate impact. Hall and Nash had an immediate impact. They were contributing positively right out of the box. Piper with his batshit crazy promos, Savage just being Savage, and Hogan being a star brought a lot of eyeballs to things and made WCW, made them appear bigger than they had been previously. And then Hall and Nash obviously jump-started the best years in WCW history from a creative and a financial standpoint. So then we get to Bret Hart, who they totally dropped the ball with. and the Ultimate Warrior, who right out the gate, it was like, what the hell was that? And it just kept spiraling, and it kept getting worse, where he kidnapped a disciple, who was really Ed Leslie, Brutus Beefcake, kidnapped him and brainwashed him into joining the One Warrior Nation. Although I guess if there's another person with you, it's not really a One Warrior Nation anymore. Who knows? And you get, those baffling segments like Hogan seeing Warrior in the mirror and all this other stuff. And it was just, it was like, it was really an indicator of WCW being kind of like behind the times in a sense, because that type of stuff you would have expected to see in like early 90s WWF, like that period, or like early 90s WCW when they were doing goofy shit. And to see it here, it just didn't feel right at all whatsoever. And it just came off like a bad cartoon. And of course it culminated with what happened at Halloween Havoc 98, one of the worst, probably the worst match of both men's careers. And, the Ultimate Warrior's entire run with the company was just a terrible mess all the way through, where nothing of value was accomplished, which is very unfortunate. But you'd think adding Warrior to the mix would be exciting, but Warrior is a bit of a type A personality as a person behind the scenes, and I think they could just kind of let him do whatever he wanted, and what he wanted was just batshit crazy and just didn't work, especially in 1998. And another big failure during this period, I talked about it in the previous episode, but the Wolfpack, the NWO Wolfpack, where, by the end of last episode, I had mentioned that they'd built up the Wolfpack, and then out of nowhere, they took Kurt Hennig and Rick Rude away from the group, and they took Elizabeth away from the group. And here things got even worse because Randy Savage got hurt, and he was like the mouthpiece of the Wolfpack, and you're losing that bit of insanity. So without Savage, a lot of the personality is gone. And then Sting got hurt towards the end of the year. So without either of them there, like the Wolfpack felt like a lot smaller than NWO Hollywood, which just kept getting bigger and bigger with the more bodies they threw into it. So the Wolfpack barely felt like a faction. And by the end of the year, it was just Kevin Nash, Conan, and Luger. And that was it. So it was like the Wolfpack had been reduced to almost nothing. And such a cool idea, cool theme song, cool merch, cool everything, and it just didn't have the creative support. Like I said, Scott Hall should have been in the group from the very beginning. Of course, they did all the weird things with Scott Hall's personal life, which was another creative misstep because it was more uncomfortable than anything else to have Scott Hall puking all over the place and drunkenly stumbling out to the ring and all that other stuff. That just felt like it was in poor taste and was like pulling the curtain back in ways that fans shouldn't have been privy to. It just didn't work. And it created a situation where Hall and Nash had to be against each other in a way. And it just felt wrong. The whole thing just felt wrong. So the Wolfpack, unfortunately, another victim of bad creative, when it should have been like a major hit. And the NWO concept got diluted even further when Eddie Guerrero, who famously cut that coffee promo where Bischoff threw the coffee at him or whatever and kind of walked out. He started his own version of the NWO, which was the Latino World Order, and got Rey Mysterio involved in that and all the luchador guys, all the heel luchadors and everything, and did the angle with Rey. And I guess it could have worked if maybe they had actually done something with them and pushed them a little harder instead of just keeping them exclusively in the Cruiserweight division. But as is, it just looked like, oh, now we've got a Cruiserweight NWO. And it just looked kind of lame to have yet another group of people wearing NWO-style t-shirts. And it didn't work. That didn't work either. And not for lack of trying on Eddie's part. I think Eddie was like, as a performer, was starting to really come into his own. And was kind of discovering like, oh, wow, I'm really good as a heel and I can cut promos. And I think the LWO was a good platform for that. I just think the overall idea didn't really work for anybody involved. So, yeah, a lot of missteps happening here in 98. So was there anything good that happened in the second half of 98? Well, the big thing is obviously Goldberg. Goldberg, who actually this period that I'm talking about here, the first episode of Nitro is the July 6th episode where Goldberg won the title from Hogan at the Georgia Dome. Arguably the biggest episode in Nitro history, arguably the best episode in Nitro history. It's probably the most well-remembered episode in Nitro history, and deservedly so. It had the feel and air of a WrestleMania. I mean, you look at Goldberg jackhammering Hogan and winning the titles. being a double champion, both the world and the U.S. champion, holding both belts up in front of that Georgia Dome crowd, the largest crowd in WCW history, at least in America. I don't know if they count the Korea shows for that, but it had the air and feel of a WrestleMania to it, and they had a bona fide star in Goldberg, so watching him tear through people and just beat the shit out of people and win these quick matches, it was an effective way to kind of get the most out of the least with him. And I thought his match with the Giant was really cool, where he beat him in a minute and a half, but some of the build up to that was pretty effective, even though it would have been nice to have that on pay-per-view. He also had a match with Sting that was very good. But again, would have been nice to have that match on pay-per-view. I think they could have gotten some big pay-per-view buy rates out of Goldberg if they had actually saved some of his big matches for pay-per-view, which they didn't do. Like I said, the Sting match, which was great, was on Nitro and not on pay-per-view. The match with the Giant, which was exciting for kind of the novelty of it, was not saved for pay-per-view. They did it on Nitro. And there was a lot of things like that. He also had a feud with Bam Bam Bigelow towards the end of the year, which that stuff was exciting, with Bam Bam constantly attacking Goldberg and them having brawls all over the building and everything. It would have been nice to see a pay-per-view match out of those two, but that never really materialized, unfortunately. So some drop balls with Goldberg, but overall the presentation was still very exciting, and they got some good stuff out of him. He also had of course, a great match with Diamond Dallas Page at Halloween Havoc, which is probably the best match of his career. And Goldberg was kind of the last really big star that they had, because, you could say they kind of ruined Sting with the Starrcade thing and what happened after that, and they kind of, and of course putting him in the Wolfpack didn't help. The NWO was becoming watered down, and all these other ideas were kind of falling by the wayside. So Goldberg was kind of the last thing they had left that was really exciting and really hot. And then, of course, they ruined it with the Finger Poke of Doom and the ultimate follow-up of the Finger Poke of Doom, which didn't go anywhere. Other stuff that I liked, we kind of got the last gasp of the Flock as Saturn left the Flock and started a feud where he fought to free the other members of the Flock from Raven's grasp. And that created some really good stuff. Had a really good match at the pay-per-view, which was kind of the finale to the whole thing. And it was, signs of the talent that Saturn had. I think Perry Saturn is one of the more underrated talents of that era. I think he was a really, really good talent. It was nice to see some of that. We also got to see Billy Kidman kind of break away from the Flock and become the next big cruiserweight champion, the next big cruiserweight star, and kind of the standard bearer of the division. That would carry out through the rest of the year as well. And Kidman could have been WCW's answer to Bret Hart in '91, that up-and-comer underdog guy that slowly moves his way up the ranks. He kind of had that feel to him during his cruiserweight days. Never really materialized, unfortunately, but early on, there was an excitement to Kidman that he had, especially when he went singles and started going into the cruiserweight rankings. And other new stars that were pushed, we saw a push for Wrath that was actually fun to watch, because he was just murdering people, so it was kind of like a heel Goldberg thing. It would have been nice to get that feud, but didn't really happen. Nash just kind of beat him, and it was used as a way to build up Nash and Goldberg at Starrcade. But I really enjoyed watching Wrath. I was like, yeah, it's cool. It's just a big guy that beats the shit out of people. Nothing wrong with that. We also see the heel turn and push for the Cat. It was kind of like a Disco Inferno honky tonk man type of act, where it's more of a comedy act, but he gets heel heat, and it was fun for that. So there was some good stuff going on there. Also, Chris Jericho, I got to mention, this is probably some of the best stuff that Chris Jericho did in 1998. He concludes his feuds with Dean Malenko and Juventud Guerrera, and really his time in the cruiserweight division, and eventually moves into the TV title rankings and becomes the TV champion. And he has that great feud with Goldberg that, again, ultimately did not have a payoff. Would have been great to get that on pay-per-view, but the Jericho that you see here, the one that mocks Goldberg and has Ralphus as part of his security force, and the last days of his cruiserweight run, a lot of good stuff here. And like I've said before, you look at Chris Jericho during his time in WCW. That was when he really came to life as a character, and 1998 was his big breakout year, and it continued through here, where he continued to be one of the best parts of the show and showed that he had a personality that could work if you pushed him further up the card. And they did. I mean, they put him, all right, he's got his cruiserweight run, now he's the TV champion. I was like, so you're thinking 99 is going to be his year, and of course we all know what happened, but For a while, it was a very exciting time to be a Jerichoholic, for sure. And other stuff that I enjoyed, the Steiner Brothers feud. If you know me, you know I'm a big Steiner brother mark. And to see Rick and Scott feuding with each other was kind of sad, but also exciting because I wanted Rick to kick his ass. And I thought that had a pretty decent payoff. It wasn't as bad as a lot of other tag teams split up and have a feud type of feuds, because a lot of those, for whatever reason, don't work out well. But I thought they did some good stuff, and I thought Bagwell was a good fit for Scott Steiner as a partner, and because he's just a perfect, hateable, punchable piece of garbage. So I thought he fit the role really well. So I did enjoy a lot of the Steiner Brothers feud, and the last big thing that happened at the end of 98, the last big storyline thing, was the return of the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Woo! One of the best moments in Nitro history, where the Horsemen reformed and brought out Ric Flair for his great return. One of, if not the greatest promo of Flair's career, the famous, "Go ahead and fire me! I'm already fired!" That whole tirade against Bischoff was just amazing, and one of the last great, truly amazing segments in Monday Nitro history, the whole return of Flair. And the feud with Bischoff was outstanding heading into Starrcade. It was probably the best built match heading into that year's Starrcade. Would have been nice if Flair won, but they did the thing where Bischoff wins at the pay-per-view, and then Flair gets his revenge, I think it was the next night, on Nitro. It's all right, fine, whatever. But the feud was great, and it had a great heel, and you had a babyface that you wanted to see kick his ass. So, to that end, it was very, very good stuff. So, so that kind of concludes this whole period. Like I said, it ended with the finger poke of doom, which is one of the biggest creative missteps in the history of the business. But it's at this period after this, you kind of get the sense yes, WCW still has some really good things going on, but at the same time, it's it also feels like the bloom is off the rose a little bit, and WWE, WWF kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and WCW was just making more and more mistakes. And that would become even more clear in 1999 and 2000, where it was there was no room for comparison, which was the bigger show. 98, they were more on equal footing. By 99, it was WWF or bust. Screw WCW. It was, and it's kind of depressing. So, so because of that, I will not be covering 1999 Nitros and 2000s and 2001s because I just can't, and I cannot go back and watch that because for reasons I've said before. A, the shows are terrible. B, the shows are long because we're into the 3-hour Nitro period at this point, and I have no desire to sit through all those shows. I just don't. Maybe I'd watch the first year of Thunder or something like that, because you're still into good WCW territory at that point. But I really, really don't want to watch 99, 2000, 2001. But before I give my MVP, my best match, and my best episode from this final period of Nitro that I'm going to cover, I want to talk about the last years of WCW Nitro and talk about, was there anything I liked about those periods? Because we all know about the bad stuff. We know about what Vince Russo did. We know about what the show had turned into by the end. Was there anything that was good about the last 2.5 years of Monday Nitro? Last 2 years of Monday Nitro, let's say. Well, Bret Hart finally got something to do. Bret Hart became the world champion and actually had decent feuds. He had the steel plate incident with Goldberg, which really worked. It was probably his best moment in WCW. And he got to main event a Starrcade out of it, although it ended up killing his career, unfortunately. But Bret Hart got a renewed interest and was oh, okay, so we're going to invest in Bret Hart finally. That's cool. Awesome. So that was good to see. The Cruiserweights continue. The Cruiserweights continued to be a source of, well, these guys, they try hard and they put forth a great effort in their matches. Even if some of their matches get flip-floppy, car wrecky type of matches, it's well, these guys are trying. And there was this influx of new talent that was just popping up left and right, where it's who's this Shane Helms guy? And who's this AJ Styles guy who pops up towards the end? And I think Elix Skipper was one of them. I think Christopher Daniels was one of them. It was really a lot of what you saw in the Cruiserweight division towards the end in WCW. It was kind of the formation of the Ring of Honor, indie style that would take over in the 2000s and that type of thing that you really do see on a mainstream level today. for better or worse. That's a different discussion entirely, but like that evolution of the business was starting to show itself in WCW during this period. So that's really interesting and cool to see. There were some tag teams I liked during the period. I was a big mark for Chronic, which should surprise no one because I like big, brawly thugs that beat the shit out of each other. It's the reason I like Butcher and the Blade in AEW. It's like, look, I like thugs that beat the shit out of people, and if you make a tag team out of that, I'll be happy. Road Warriors, Demolition, I love those guys. I just love those type of tag teams, and Chronic was right up there for me. I was like, yeah, they're fun. I like them. They beat the shit out of people. It's great. I say that a couple tag teams that I enjoyed. It was nice to see Booker T get the title, even though I would have liked for it to happen under different circumstances. I think Booker's one of the guys that should have been on the track to get to the world title. Unfortunately, the company had to almost die for him to get to that point. It would have been nice if WCW had put the title on him while they were still creatively hot. And you had like Booker and Jericho and those guys, that next generation, Raven and those type of guys that could have been the world champion and could have been in main event world title contention, and it just didn't happen because of a multitude of reasons. But it was nice to see Booker get the belt. It was nice to see Scott Steiner get the belt. I think Scott Steiner was great during this period. He was just, again, because he's Scott Steiner. He's just a character unto himself and is delightful to watch. Jeff Jarrett, I think, delivered a lot of his hardest work during this period where it's like, okay, this guy's a fucking workhorse. And Jeff Jarrett's a guy who I think is a massively underrated worker. I think he's a very good worker. Doesn't always get the credit for it. He's got a great old school sensibility to him. And always put like 110% into anything he was given. I think he showed that in WCW. I think he showed that in his various runs in WWE. I think he showed it in TNA. He's not a guy, I'll say this, Jarrett's not a guy that would definitely be my world champion if I was starting up a promotion, but he's a guy I would definitely always have something for because I know he'll hit it out of the park. And I know he will put 110%. It's kind of like what I say about Cody all the time, where Cody Rhodes, it's like, say what you want about Cody, and you can say, it's like, oh, he doesn't have the look or whatever, and some people say he's not big enough to be a world champion, but it's like, yeah, but that dude gives 110%. That dude poured his heart and soul into Stardust to try and make that thing work. And Jeff Jarrett poured his heart and soul to try and make 2000 WCW work. And kudos to him for that. David Arquette, probably not his idea, but he did his best to try and make it work. And I give him all the credit in the world for that. DDP stayed, remained like a really good part of the show. It was kind of like DDP was kind of becoming like, what's the comparison I want to make? I guess like The Undertaker or something like that, where he's like that reliable veteran that gave credibility to anybody he worked with and any feud he worked with. Like, he had a match with David Flair at Starrcade 99 that was way better than it had any business being, given that it was David Flair. And DDP, I think, deserves a lot of credit for that. And DDP, even though I didn't mention him a whole heck of a lot during this video, DDP was just always a really reliable, hardworking hand that you could stick him in almost anything, and he'll do his absolute damnedest to make it work. And that didn't stop even after WCW became a shit show. Like, he still poured his heart and soul into everything that he was given. And I think he deserves a ton of credit for that. So, for all the negatives that people can say, for all the David Arquettes and the Vince Russos and all that other stuff, there was stuff about WCW during this last years that I did enjoy, and I just wanted to make those things perfectly clear. And my favorite match during the dying days of WCW, let's say the final year, my favorite match during the final year was Goldberg versus Scott Steiner from Fall Brawl 2000. Go watch that match. It was awesome. And that match was what I pictured Lesnar Goldberg 1 at WrestleMania 20 would be like, and it wasn't that at all. If you want an idea of what that match should have been like, look at Goldberg and Steiner at Fall Brawl 2000. I think that match surprised a lot of people and how cool it was. So, that was a very good match, and I really enjoyed it. And, so even with the bad stuff, there was stuff to enjoy in the final years of WCW, and I have no problem highlighting the good stuff. So, with all that said, we're still talking about the latter half of 1998 and the first episode of 1999. So from that, what was my favorite episode during that period? I had it down to two answers. The July 6th episode, obviously the one where Goldberg wins the title. He has to have that match with Scott Hall first. and this is all going on in the Georgia Dome, which is Goldberg's backyard, and it had an exciting atmosphere to it the entire way around. And I had a list of all the matches that happened on here. We had Raven versus Canyon, Jericho versus Ultimo Dragon, with Malenko attacking Jericho. We get Chavo and Eddie's feud continuing, with Chavo challenging Eddie to a hair versus hair match. We got the Dancing Fools versus Public Enemy, Buff Bagwell injury update after the injury at the hands of Rick Steiner. Psychosis versus Hoovy. DDP and Malone are walking around. Of course, they have a role to play in the main event. And we also get the Giant versus Duggan. And Giant's big showdown with Kevin Green to set up their pay-per-view match. And also DDP versus Neidhart also happened. So there was a lot of stuff going on that show, and a lot of this stuff just sounds like 98 WCW through and through with all the names that are on there. But really, it's the Goldberg stuff that really makes that episode stand out. The match with Hall, the match with Hogan, the involvement of Karl Malone and DDP, and the big finish with Goldberg winning the title, holding up both belts in front of that large Georgia Dome crowd was exciting. And it had the feel of a WrestleMania to it, and I think it deserves a lot of credit as being one of the best episodes in Nitro history and inarguably the biggest episode in Nitro history. I think it deserves that. But my other option was the September 14th episode, which was the return of Ric Flair and him reforming the Four Horsemen. I think the build-up to that and the payoff to it, the crowd was right along with it the entire way through, and it was one of the best things that WCW's ever done. It was one of the best things they've ever shot. It was exciting all the way through. We also got Sting versus Goldberg for the title, which should have been saved for pay-per-view, but still, very good match, very exciting. We also got... We did Bret Hart doing a short-lived face turn and with Piper encouraging him to change. That didn't last. Saturn versus Kendall Windham, and this is where Saturn's like encouraging the flock to leave Raven, and after he set them free. Wrath destroys the Renegade. Hogan challenges Warrior, and this is the one where Warrior captures the Disciple, and they, do that whole stupid thing. Kidman wins the Cruiserweight title for the first time, this time from Juventud Guerrera. And also Eric Bischoff sends Eddie to Japan, which starts getting the ball rolling on Eddie coming back and setting up the LWO. And we also got Bulldog versus Barbarian, Scott Steiner and Buff versus Norman Smiley and Silver King, and with the Rick and Scott match being set for Halloween Havoc. Giant versus Meng, which was actually kind of a fun, hard-hitting type of match. And the infamous Lex Luger versus Scott Hall match where Scott Hall throws up. So not a lot of good stuff on there, but really what made me kind of consider this episode was the Ric Flair stuff, which was really well handled. Now, which one am I going to pick for best episode? I'm going to go with the Goldberg-Hogan, the July 6th episode. I think that's the bigger episode. I think it's the more exciting one, and like I said, it has the feel of a pay-per-view, but the Ric Flair stuff on that September 14th episode is great and definitely worth checking out. All right, and best match, it's a tie, many ties all around. We've got Jericho versus Dean Malenko for the Cruiserweight title, their final match on the July 27th episode. Their stuff was always great and heated because of how great the feud was and how great of a heel Jericho was, and this was no exception. This was awesome, and to see the final match between these two, it was exciting, it was very good, and one of my favorite matches during this period. Another match I really enjoyed was the Wolfpack versus NWO Hollywood for the WCW tag titles from the July 20th episode. Sting and Nash taking on Scott Hall and the Giant, which was an excellent match. I remember it getting praised at the time, which wasn't common for WCW matches involving the heavyweights. A lot of those matches didn't get a lot of praise because this was the period where, if you do backflips, you automatically get 4 stars, and if you don't do backflips, you're lucky to break 2.5. So to see that match get as praised as it did even back then was kind of surprising. And it is a very, very good tag match, and I highly recommend checking it out. I heard Bischoff and Conrad on their podcast praise it pretty heavily when they covered it, and it's absolutely worth a look. I also feel like I have to mention Hogan Goldberg from the July 6th episode, mainly because of how big it is. It's without a doubt the biggest match in Nitro history, and I think it's worthy of being viewed for its historical purposes and its exciting ending. It's not necessarily the best worked match in the world, but the stuff, all the X factors and everything surrounding it makes it one of the most must-see matches in WCW history. So really out of obligation and historical significance, I put it on here on my list. And the other match I'm including is on the aforementioned September 14th episode 98 with Goldberg defending the WCW title against Sting. An excellent, great match. First time it really felt like the streak was in danger. I guess the Hogan match was the first time it really felt like it was in danger, but it's the first time that it felt like Goldberg could lose after winning the title. And again, I wish they'd save the match for pay-per-view, but as is, I think it's a very exciting match. So those are the best matches during that period. If I had to pick an absolute best one, it's tough. It's very tough. I think I'm going to go with Goldberg and Sting, but I could just as easily go with the tag match in Jericho and Dean. So it's a tough call all around, but I really like those 4 matches I just listed, and all of them are worth checking out. And finally, we're going to do the Nitro MVP during this period, the final Nitro MVP for this video series. Who's going to get the nod? I've given the MVP award to Ric Flair in the past, and I think he would be deserving of having it here because of all the excitement that he brought once he returned, and the feud with Bischoff was so well handled that and Flair contributed in big ways to the excitement of Nitro during the latter half of '98. I feel like he would be deserving of it. I feel like DDP for being the consummate workhorse and just always delivering would be deserving of it as well. Goldberg, of course, deserves mention because he was the champion during this entire period and was the last truly big main event star that WCW had. And I think some would even say that he deserves MVP by default. I've given DDP and Goldberg MVPs before, I believe. I believe Goldberg got it last time, if I'm not mistaken. And DDP probably got it sometime in 97. But I've decided to give the MVP award for this period in Monday Nitro to Chris motherfucking Jericho because he was consistently entertaining, always evolving, and always just getting better and better and better. And to see his... one of the greatest delights I had in going back and watching these old episodes of Nitro was watching his development. Because as I said, early babyface Jericho sucks. Like, he just sucks and is lame. And then it's just somewhere along the line, a light switch just flipped on, and he became one of the best characters in wrestling. And I think his 1998 is a textbook example of what happens when you give somebody with talent and ability free range to create their own path and carve an identity for themselves. And I think Jericho did an amazing, amazing job. And I can't state enough just how good Jericho was in 1998, especially when compared to what he was doing previously, where, again, as a character, he just absolutely sucked. And then you get this guy in 98, and he looks like a future main event star waiting to happen, which ultimately he became, to his credit, for sure. So that will conclude my Nitro retrospective. And this has been a fun project. And again, I really enjoyed watching these old episodes of Nitro. And by cutting myself off at the finger poke of doom, you could say, like, okay, he's kind of cherry picking the good stuff and not wanting to watch the really bad stuff that comes later. And my response to that is, nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and I just wanted to watch the good stuff. That's all I wanted to watch. When Nitro was can't miss TV, and when Nitro was an exciting thing to watch on Monday nights. Because I think a lot of younger fans don't understand, like, the Monday Night Wars period was, again, if you weren't alive back then or you don't remember back then, it's almost impossible to understand. But it's like, let me tell you, like, there was a time when wrestling was legitimately the coolest thing on TV. Like, was drawing insane numbers that made, like, Monday Night Football jealous. Like they were drawing insane numbers. Back then, and it was so cool back then to have, especially in 97 and 98, you had 2 wrestling programs that were exciting, cool, well-written, and featured larger-than-life characters, again, on both shows, great rosters on both shows, And it was the most exciting time to be a wrestling fan because you had two excellent shows. And WCW Nitro deserves credit for kind of jump-starting that level of excitement, where it's, without the NWO, I don't think the Monday Night Wars would have been as exciting as it was. I don't think the NWO was what really jump-started, like, the arms race, I guess you would say. And again, it's like, all right, the one show had Hogan and Savage, and they were kind of like, I guess you could say, stealing stars from the WWE, and Hall and Nash showed up and everything like that. But really, like, the NWO just really started, it really knocked that snowball down the mountain. It just kept getting bigger and bigger, where the NWO was so cool and so edgy and so inventive and so really broke out into the mainstream that it forced the WWE to kind of catch up. And that's how you ended up with things like Degeneration X and Stone Cold Steve Austin and that type of stuff. So it starts with the NWO, and then from there it just became the most exciting period in pro wrestling history. And so many fond memories and so many great times to be had on both shows. And it's a time that, unfortunately, I don't think we will ever get back. I think the mindsets have changed too much. I think the landscape of television has changed too much. I think internet has taken over and become such a driving force of everything that it's almost impossible to garner the type of audiences that you had back then. And I think pop culture is just not as cool as it once was. That's my personal take. Like, again, here we were, 1998, we've got Mike Tyson on one show and Dennis Rodman on the other one. And here it's like what larger than life personality could you get that would get involved in pro wrestling? Well, I mean, there was a WrestleMania that showcased Donald Trump, so maybe I'm maybe I'm off base there, but maybe Donald Trump will go back to WWE. Who knows? But anyway, it was a very exciting time, and Nitro was a big part of that. So really, what I wanted to do was go back and watch Nitro's evolution from the starting point in '95. And then watch all the way through the NWO, and then ultimately '98, where things started to falter a little bit. You can kind of get like the rise and fall and the full thing. So it was a wonderful experience, and I really enjoyed doing it. And thank you all for watching these videos. Again, this is the finale to the Nitro series, but it's not the end of my talks with WCW, because now I'm going to kick off my Starrcade series. These videos will carry me through the rest of the year. You'll be getting a handful of Starrcade videos from me. And also, don't forget, I will be doing a live viewing, a watch-along of a Survivor Series event the day of Survivor Series. So before Survivor Series, you want to watch me watch and comment on a Survivor Series event, just join me for the live stream. And if you want to know which Survivor Series I'll be watching, check out my Twitter. The link is in the description. And there is a poll that's still open, and you get to pick which Survivor Series I will be watching. Your options are 1987, 1990, and 1998. So go ahead and make your choices, and we'll be doing that as well. So a couple of fun projects coming up. And not a whole lot centered around current events in pro wrestling, because quite honestly, like, WWE is just not doing it for me. It's like there's not a whole lot. And with NXT and AEW, it's like I'm constantly talking about the war, and there's not a whole lot going on to really, because that's a war that's not really that exciting, to be perfectly honest. But although there are things about both shows that I enjoy, it's not the same as like when Raw and Nitro were going at it. So it just kind of feels like I don't know. Again, it just doesn't do it for me. But yeah, we will have plenty to say about Starrcade and Survivor Series. I also want to watch some of the stuff that they've been doing on Undertaker on the network. I haven't had a chance to actually sit down and watch a lot of it, but I'll check those out. I heard they did a really nice documentary on Paul Bearer, which I'm definitely interested in checking that out. So with all of that said, thanks again, everybody, for watching. I had a blast doing this. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos, and continue to check me out both on this channel and on Weekday Warriors of Wrestling. Our latest video was posted on Saturday. I know weekday Warriors being posted on the weekend, but Eric and I's schedules, it's harder and harder to sync up because adult life is crazy. So even in times of COVID, where you would think that we'd have less to do, it's like, no, it's actually the opposite. We actually have more to do. But it's a crazy, crazy time, and hopefully these, I can keep doing these videos and we can just keep having fun together. But with that said, I'm out of here. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you all later.